CSS3 specification from the W3C includes a transitions module, which specifies some syntax for creating some basic animations. In this video, we'll take a look at how the transition property works. For this video, and for the rest of the videos in this chapter, we'll be using Safari 5 as our test browser. Transitions, transforms, and animations have been implemented to varying degrees across all the major browsers, with the exception of Internet Explorer, and cross-browser compatibility is obviously very important in practice. However, even without cross-browser compatibility, there's a lot of ground to cover here. As of this recording, Safari 5 has the best all-around support, but as the other browsers catch up to the W3C spec, we'll revisit this topic. The good news is, the transition property that I'm about to show you degrades very gracefully in browsers that don't support transitions yet. Now, as you can see here, I've created a basic page for us to work with a div right in the center that we'll be applying our transitions to. And switching over to my text editor, you can see that I've created some very basic markup here. There's a wrapper div, and there's our div right in the center of the page. And I'm going to switch over to our style sheet here, and I've just applied some very basic styling just to get the page in order and make it a little bit prettier for us to look at. Now I'm going to switch over to a separate style sheet, and this is where we will be applying our transitions, just for the sake of clarity. Now to start off, we're going to need to create two states for our transition to go between. The current state that our orange div is in will be the first state. To create the second state, we'll add a hover pseudo class to our div and add a box shadow. So I'm just going to select my div and add the hover pseudo class. And I'm going to add a WebKit box shadow. And just punch in a few values there. Make it black. And when we switch back over to Safari and refresh the browser, you can see that now when I hover over the orange div, a box shadow appears. Pretty nifty. Now that we have two states to transition between, we can go ahead and add our transition. Now I'm going to go ahead and type out our transition, show you what it looks like in the browser, and then I'll break down each argument one at a time. So the first thing we need to do is just select the div by itself without the hover pseudo class. And then we'll type WebKit transition. And we want to transition on the box shadow. And we'll give it a duration of 1 second. And we want a linear animation curve. Now switching back to Safari, I'll refresh the browser. And now, when I hover over, you can see that the box shadow that we added before slowly appears and disappears. Now, let's take a closer look at this code. The first thing that you probably noticed is the vendor prefix for WebKit. Should the W3C decide to change the transition property, WebKit's implementation won't break future compatibility. When the standard has been finalized, these vendor prefixes won't be necessary, and the property would just say transition rather than WebKit transition. Now the first argument that we passed to WebKit transition is called the property argument. This specifies what property to transition on, and just about any CSS property can be animated. Now in this case, I've set the transition property to be the WebKit box shadow that we applied to the hover pseudo class on our div, but by default, the property argument is set to a constant called all. And all just means that you want to transition on all of the properties that are applied to the element. You can also set this value to none if you don't want to transition on any properties at all. This is useful if you're using JavaScript to turn transitions on and off for certain elements. Now, not only can we transition between the box shadow, we can transition between any number of properties. So I'll go ahead and add a different background color. We'll make it a nice green color here. And we'll change WebKit box shadow to say all. And when I switch back to Safari and refresh the browser, you can see that when I hover over, not only is the box shadow applied, but the color of the element also transitions. That's just a taste of the transition property. In the next video, we'll learn how to create our own custom Bezier animation curves.